How's it going, folks? CR here. And as y'all know, the last few videos I've discussed the alt-right and did a response to an ethno-nationalist, and this ethno-nationalist has done a response to me, so I haven't forgotten about you. I did see your response, and I do want to put up a response to this. So on this response, I mean, you have done exactly what I've pointed out in the first video. You'll take a really good point that you're right on, but then you'll go off the cliff with it, ignoring other portions of data. One such example is your comment that you're a nationalist and that you believe Japan is for the Japanese, China's for the Chinese, Europe's for the Europeans, America's for the Americans. That's perfectly valid. That's nothing to be disagreed with right there. You'd have to be a fool to disagree with that. However, when you continue on in the video, you do say things that cast doubt on if you're truly genuine on America being for all Americans, such as the Thomas Jefferson quote. Now, I've never heard this quote from Thomas Jefferson before, not the portion of it and not the other half of it. However, presuming he did say this, it would seem that you don't believe the black Americans are truly Americans and could truly live in the same country as the white Americans. Suffice to say. So there does appear that there is a slight inconsistency on this one. Another such example, on your response to my comment saying that there were a disproportionate number of Jewish people that engaged in identity politics, and I understood the double standard there, that there was a double standard when it comes to identity politics. Well, you kind of took that to mean something that I was not saying. I did not say that it was a norm or even a majority of Jewish people engaged in this. In fact, to the contrary, there are a lot of Jewish people that do not engage in identity politics, and there are a lot of them you wouldn't know that they were Jewish unless you asked them or unless they told you, you know. But continuing on with this, I do want to bring up a chart. Don't get too hung up on it, and I know it's going to be a little bit dry, but I think I need to do this exercise here, you know, just to clarify a bit of what I'm going to be talking about. Now, this chart is of a fictional study. Researchers took 1,000 from each demographic and observed their behavior traits and recorded their behavior traits. So, in the first column, behavior X, it is noticeable that demographic A participated in this behavior, 2% of them did. Demographic B, 5% of them participated in behavioral trait X. Demographic C, 2%. So from this right here, you can observe that a disproportionate number of demographic B engaged in this behavior. However, that is a correlation at best. Notwithstanding that if you were to do this at a different time, or another researcher was to replicate this study, they may very well get different results. As you can see in column Y, you see a significant minority of demographic A engaging in behavioral trait Y, you see an overwhelming majority of demographic B engaging in behavioral trait Y, and you see still a significant minority of people in demographic C engaging in behavioral trait Y. With this, you can say that, well, a majority of people in demographic B and significant minorities in demographic A and C engaged in behavioral trait Y. You might also go and look at behavioral trait Y results and behavioral trait X results and possibly presume there is a correlation there. However, before you can actually really say there is any sort of correlation there, you'd have to go back and look at the individual results of who engaged in behavioral trait X. Was it all, none, or some of people who engaged in behavioral trait X that also engaged in behavioral trait Y? So, and even doing that, you just have a correlation at that point. You would have to then go back and further research to find out if there is any sort of causal link. And I deal with this mentality with gun controllers all the time, because they will take one very small set of data and they won't even have a correlation, but they'll claim that they have a correlating and causing relationship. Falsely, you know. And there are a lot of different groups of people that will do this. Now you go over to behavioral trait Z, and it would appear that there is a negative correlation between behavioral trait X and Y, but then again, you have to actually go and look at the individual numbers. And with behavioral trait Q, it would not even appear that there is any sort of correlation, but you can go and look at the numbers and see if there's any sort of correlation between the behaviors there. You would have to actually further look into it. Did the individuals in demographic C, were they the same ones that behaved in both behavioral trait Y and behavioral trait Q? Well, we don't know. So it is, a little bit more than just looking at the data in two dimensions. And mind you, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a mathematician. I don't really consider myself to be a very educated man. However, even I know this. So yes, it is easy to look at FBI crime statistics broken down by race and come to a false conclusion here or there, you know. There are a number of false conclusions you can come to simply by looking at that data on its surface and not examining further. Homicide rates, yes, blacks do not make up a majority of the country, and yes, there is a majority of the homicides being committed by blacks. However, when you look into it further, you'll find it's only a small minority of blacks that are committing these homicides. When you further break down the victims of these homicides, it's overwhelmingly blacks that are the victims of homicides. And if you break down perpetrator by race and victim by race, you'll find out that more often than not, you're overwhelmingly more likely to be killed by a member of your own race than a member of another race. So yes, it is very possible also to take a number of anecdotal cases and use them to create a false impression. One thing Black Lives Matter does is they'll take police shootings and be they justifiable or unjustifiable, will use them to make the claim that blacks have to fear being shot by the police all the time, when in fact this is not exactly true. The number of police shootings of blacks, justifiable and unjustifiable, it is a small sliver of the homicides, and they're still overwhelmingly more likely to be killed by a member of their own race. Now, when it comes to blacks committing racially motivated violence against whites, that is still a small sliver of it. Still, if you are going to experience any sort of violence as a white person, it's generally going to be another white person that does it to you, in the vast majority of the time. And as members of Black Lives Matter will exclude the good things the police do for the blacks, generally speaking, the white identitarians tend to exclude the good things that blacks have done for this country, generally speaking. That pictures the late U.S. Army Sergeant David Johnson. This man was killed in an ambush in Niger while he was fighting for the U.S., while he was serving our country. He's not the only one. There are many blacks that serve this country in the U.S. Army. There are many blacks that are police officers. There are many blacks that do a lot of good things for this country too. And it's not right to exclude those things. And it also creates the false impression that because somebody's black means they're incapable of doing something for their country. And yes, a disproportionate number of crimes are committed by blacks. However, this still doesn't have a causal link to their race. And I think that there are a lot of contributing factors that play into this, while the race is really irrelevant. One such factor is single parenthood households. Criminals of all races are more likely to come from a single parenthood household, and I think that might have a contributing factor to it. Another such contributing factor, at least within the blacks that do commit crimes, is you will have, and leftists are guilty as hell of this, some of them are anyway, is they will take the absolute worst thug that got killed in commission of a crime and prop him up as if he was some sort of victim or some sort of martyr. Take Trayvon Martin. Any way you look at it, this kid was a criminal. He was killed in the commission of a crime. I'm not saying George Zimmerman was entirely in the right either. But Barack Obama propped this guy up. Now, Holiday on the left got no mention from Obama, and he was killed serving his country. I would figure Holiday should have been the one Barack Obama should have been giving some notice to, not Trayvon Martin. And since we're on the topic of armed forces, I thought it'd be a good idea, a good time to bring up the conspiracy theory you brought up about the USS Liberty. Look, it's far more plausible and, in fact, far more certain that this was a major screw-up between the armed forces of Israel and the United States. Yes, blue on blue, green on blue, blue on green. These things happen even today. It's why the armed forces harp so heavily on communication. And it is because communication miscommunication, I should say, is a major contributing factor in fratricide. As for various ethnicities being limited to their certain regions in the world, and this being the norm throughout human history, well, you also have to take into consideration that throughout human history, we did not have the same technology we do today. With our modern aerospace technology, if you have the money, you can go to just about any place in the world, or most places in the world are accessible within 24 hours. We haven't had that technology throughout human history. In fact, through most of our human history, if you wanted to go somewhere, you had to walk. So that means that, most people died pretty close to where they were born. And that's just a fact of the matter. We have a lot of technologies today that we did not have throughout human history, in fact. And it's enabled us to do a lot of different things. So it's pretty fallacious to presume that just because ethnicities were separated throughout history means it has to be that way for people to get along, especially considering the fact that throughout history we've had no way to really test that like we do today. And I do agree, a nation is defined by its borders, its culture, and its legal system. And I understand, yes, that people who grew up in one culture all their lives are going to have a very difficult time going to another country with a completely different culture and a completely different legal system and fitting in. I understand that when you do this in mass, the problem compounds on itself. So, I agree with you that mass immigration is a bad idea. However, I do disagree that somebody's ethnicity plays even a significant role on this. When it comes to forming a person, shaping a person, the local culture they grew up in is probably going to have a far greater influence on this. To clarify what I mean by this, I probably have more in common with the blacks in the South and in some southern states than I do with whites, say, from New York City. And I'm pretty sure you probably have more in common with more American blacks than you do with European whites, or the American blacks have with African blacks. The cultures are night and day, and I can tell you right now, I've been to Africa. The cultures are different. I guarantee you blacks in America probably have more in common with the whites in America than they do with the blacks in Africa. As for the birth rates, well, before I start on the birth rates, there is one question I want to ask, and it is, do you think we were hurting for people in the 1950s? I mean, in the 1950s, do you think our population was in some sort of danger of going extinct? All right, as of 2018, our population is 327 million. In the 1950s, it was a little over 151 million. We have over double the population today in the U.S. than we did in the 1950s. So to sustain our population, we'd need a 2.1% birth rate, as you pointed out. However, if you keep that, you're going to sustain the 327 million people. Whereas in the 1950s, when we had far fewer people, homes were more affordable. You could actually buy your own home there. And I think that our lower population in the 1950s, coupled with the fact that we weren't just granting anybody and everybody a home loan, regardless of whether or not they could pay it back, also probably had something to do with housing being much more affordable in the 1950s than today. So while in my previous response I did say it was very disturbing what the UN was doing when they were talking about using replacement migration, I found that to be very disturbing. I also don't see a problem with our birth rates declining and us going back to a lower population. I think the problem with a lot of places is they have more people in there than they can possibly fit, and I do not see raising the birth rates as being a viable solution. In fact, there are a lot of countries, it would not hurt them if their populations dropped a bit. We're not in any danger of going extinct. And as for your comments on those 14 words, well, I'm going to put it to you this way. I don't think somebody should be judged because they are white. I don't think somebody should be discriminated against because they're white. And I don't think somebody should be killed off or exterminated because they are white. I also don't think that identity politics is anything but toxic, and I've said this before. And I've also said before, I understand that there is a double standard at times when it comes to engaging in identity politics, and this time around, in this current day, the white identitarians are probably getting the short end of the stick on that one. It doesn't make them right. Think about a family has 5 children now. They were told don't get into the cookie jar and steal a cookie. Parents are sitting there watching, 1, 2, 3, and 4 go and steal a cookie. And then child 5 comes along, tries to steal a cookie. Parents bust their ass, put the cookie back in the jar, and then tell the kid to sit in the corner. Doesn't make it right what the 5th child did. It just means he got the short end of the stick, and the parents were also wrong for letting the first 4 children do that too. And I understand this is a free country. So yeah, you're free to engage in your identity politics. Everyone's free to engage in their identity politics. It doesn't mean I don't think that they're toxic. And let's face facts. While yes, we've seen the negative effects of identity politics when it comes to Jewish, non-white, so on and so forth, there was also a set of negative effects that came on with white identitarians. The Ku Klux Klan is one example of a negative effect of identity politics. And that's just the way it is. The videos you showed of people being lynched on your response, yeah, that was bad. And I don't doubt identity politics played, at least some role in that. However, how's that any different from what the Klan did to blacks in the 50s, 60s, and so on? I don't really see much of a difference. They're both heinous crimes, Yeah, lynching people is bad. Lynching people based on their race is bad. Lynching people for most reasons is pretty well bad in and of itself. I mean, I guess I can understand, doing that to a murderer or something like that, but, it still doesn't make it right. Anyway, so I think this response is going on long enough. It's gone on longer than I've intended to do, and hopefully I provided a bit more information, to at least give you some things to consider and to actually think about yourself on this one. I don't think you particularly are a bad person. I think that you are, however, are misguided in some ways. So, again, as I say, I know I don't think I'm going to change your opinion with just these one or two responses, but I at least wanted to give you something to think about. And for everyone else who's gotten this far, I know this video has been pretty dry, but thanks for watching. Y'all take her easy out there and have a great day.